Hello, this is Rick Curtis from OutdoorEd.com, the Outdoor Professionals online resource. And this is another video in our series on risk management for outdoor programs. Today's video is Understanding the Risk Gap, Balancing Activity Level and Risk in Your Outdoor Program. Let's take a look at the concept of the risk gap. As you know, there's always some level of risk in outdoor programming. Your goal as a program manager is to find an appropriate level of risk that balances your program goals and objectives with your program preparedness. Here we can see a sample program that has a basic level of program preparedness that exists in relation to a particular activity. For example, if the activity was canoeing, the program preparedness would include staff training in canoeing, appropriate equipment, etc. For each activity, there's also an activity level bar that sets the ceiling for the level of difficulty, challenge, and risk that you are going to accept in doing that activity. The gap between your program preparedness and the activity level bar is your risk gap. This represents the fact that regardless of how much you have prepared, there's still the possibility of an accident. The risk gap can never be completely eliminated, but it can be managed and reduced. Each program has to determine what risk gap level is appropriate for each activity you do. Also, that risk gap has to be appropriately in sync with your program's mission statement. One way of managing your risk gap is by moving the activity level bar. We can raise the bar or lower the bar while keeping program preparedness the same and change the risk gap. For a college outdoor program like I run, we might set the activity level bar for canoeing trips at flatwater canoeing based on the level of training, experience, etc. our staff have in canoeing. We can also raise or lower the activity level bar through things like activity location. Is the trip a flatwater canoeing trip on the Delaware River in New Jersey, or the Shinjak River in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? Another method of managing the risk gap is by changing program preparedness. Let's say that we can add additional program preparedness. For example, we have our staff complete a whitewater canoe certification course. With more advanced training, we could decide to raise the activity level bar. For example, doing Class 2 whitewater canoeing instead of flatwater canoeing. There's still a risk gap, but we have expanded our ability to deal with it, and may have in fact kept the gap the same, or even reduced it. What this means is that there are multiple approaches for managing our risk gap. One is by increasing program preparedness. If we do that and keep the activity level bar the same, we can reduce our risk gap. Another method is to keep the program preparedness the same and lower the activity level bar. And finally, we can modulate both program preparedness and activity level simultaneously. We know that risk gap is the difference between our program preparedness and our activity level bar. That is the level of risk we are exposed to. A component of the risk gap is our program's level of risk tolerance. Risk tolerance is the level of risk that your program has decided is appropriate to take on given your mission, resources, etc. It's important to understand that risk gap and risk tolerance are not the same. In the first example, we see a risk gap that is higher than the risk tolerance, which means that you are operating outside of your organizational risk management parameters. In the second case, on the right, we see that the risk gap is lower than the risk tolerance. If your risk tolerance is less than or equal to your risk gap, then you are operating within your organizational risk management parameters. Let's take a look at some of the things that make up program preparedness. One critical element, of course, is the training of staff. We can break that down into categories like leadership skills, wilderness skills, risk management training, first aid training, training in emergency procedures, training in group dynamics. In addition to that training, we can add other things which make up our program preparedness for that particular activity in no particular order. Evaluation and feedback to staff, protocols, staff field experience, staff judgment, field observation of staff. Of course, there is always still a risk gap between our program preparedness and our activity level. Putting it all together in this slide illustrates the difference between several types of outdoor programs. The first program you see is a sample college outdoor program. As the director of a college outdoor program that works with volunteer student leaders, our program preparedness is not as extensive as a professionally staffed organization like the National Outdoor Leadership School or Outward Bound. We manage our risk gap through the interaction of our program preparedness, shown with the red level, and modulating our activity level bar, the blue arrow. In our case, we were able to give some training and a limited amount of evaluation and feedback to staff. Since staff have less field experience and less experience in making judgments in the outdoors, we supplement that with having a broad set of protocols and support structures. As a result, in order to keep our risk gap at an acceptable level, we consciously set our activity level bar fairly low. In the center, we see a program like the National Outdoor Leadership School or Outward Bound. They do more training, do regular evaluation and feedback of staff, including field observation. The staff have extensive field experience and can rely on their judgment to make decisions. Of course, there are still protocols which are implemented by the staff. As a result, these professional programs can operate with a higher activity level bar. For example, running a canoeing trip in a more remote area than a college program might. Finally, on the right, we see a mythical perfect program which has high levels of everything across the program preparedness spectrum. They can set an even higher activity level bar, but even with all of their program preparedness, there will always still be a risk gap. I hope this presentation of understanding the risk gap in outdoor programming will be a helpful part of your program's overall risk management plan. Here are some important takeaway points. You want to understand your program's risk tolerance. For each activity you do, analyze your program preparedness for that activity. Assess what your risk gap is for each activity and compare that against your risk tolerance. If the risk gap is out of sync with your risk tolerance, you need to either change the activity level bar, change the program preparedness, or both. You can download a copy of this PowerPoint presentation from the OutdoorEd.com website that includes the full presenter's notes for use in your own staff trainings. If you're not already a member of the Outdoor Ed community, you'll just need to set up a free account. Go to the link shown above, www.outdoored.com/community, and enter risk gap in the search box to locate the file, as well as this online video. It's provided under the Creative Commons license, which allows you to use it free for non-commercial purposes. Another presentation that I highly recommend, which also addresses the risk gap concept, is the Risk Assessment and Safety Management System, also known as RASM. You can find materials about it on the site by searching for RASM. There are many more useful resources for outdoor program professionals that can be found on OutdoorEd.com. Thanks for joining us today.